what I'm really focused on is thinking about how do we unlock the capital that goes into those specific technologies so that in, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years, I could hold in my hand a lump of plastic that I know is carbon negative. Right? Now that's exciting.
So we've got something really special for you from Climate Curious for this episode. We're recording live from the New York Times Climate Forward event at the Conduit in central London. How exciting is that, Ben?
There's so many parts to that introduction. It is very exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're so
in
happy to be here. We've been spending the last couple of days listening to some incredible minds, from very different backgrounds, like fields and perspectives. And we've got a couple of guests for you in this episode and the next one from today that we are excited to share with you. So let's just get into it.
Let's dive in.
All right. So Ben, I don't know about you, but when I think about plastics, I think about plastic straws and plastic bags. I mean, that's what all the kind of conversation has been about when it comes to stuff. But so I'm actually really excited for this conversation because I think what we need to do is take it a little bit beyond that. Because I think actually we see that plastic is probably a much bigger problem, but a real global problem. And when it comes to climate change, I think there are loads of angles that maybe we really haven't thought about when it comes to plastic and what we're going to do about it going forward. So I am so excited for this conversation because I know you're thinking plastic.
Super interesting. No, I'm joking.
Right? That not the first thing to come to mind. But like many times, I want you to trust me.
Okay.
Because we've got a really awesome speaker for us to come and explain the whole world of plastics, give us a super great foundation, all things plastic with us. So I want to welcome Peter Gault. He is the Program Director for Plastic Circularity and Abatement at Systemic. He works across their materials and energy platform. And now he specializes in something called hybrid circularity and looks at greenhouse gas reduction strategies. I don't know what that means. Do you know?
No, literally no idea.
So I'm really excited for Peter, for you to explain that. I want to ask you, Peter, I'm going to call you a plastic expert. I don't know if that. I don't know if you want that.
If you like,
title.
Yeah, sure.
Tell me, when we think about climate and when we think about plastic, what should we be thinking about? Why is it a problem? Like, what are the things here that we need to know, the foundational basics?
Okay, so plastic is made of carbon, right? It is 80% roughly made of carbon.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's incredibly carbon dense.
It's metaphor. I know this sounds ridiculous probably to someone who's done this, but I think I'm a pretty educated person. Until I started doing climate work, I didn't know plastic came from oil.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
We dig oil out the ground, we take bits out to make gasoline and various other things, and some of the byproducts we then take and we turn it into plastic. So that's where our plastic comes from.
Wow, sorry. This is like the first sentence that you said, and I'm like, what? Oh my God. I didn't know that. That's wild. Okay, sorry, continue.
So, we dig that oil out the ground, and just very much the process of digging out the ground means that you get some methane going into the atmosphere, right?
Yeah, and we've talked about methane before.
So even just the producing of the plastic causes emissions.
Yeah.
And then once you've made the plastic, we use it, and we tend to use it once, right? We only about 9% of all plastic gets recycled at the moment. And then having used it once, then we end up throwing it away. And the trouble is, we either bury it in the ground in landfills, which then causes a lot of the time more methane emissions, or we burn it. So all that carbon I was just talking about then gets sent up into the atmosphere. And we're doing more and more and more of this incineration, which is meaning that the emissions are accelerating, not slowing down. So that's why it's a big problem when it comes to
every stage of almost in the production of the life cycle of this plastic, it is in a way emitting some kind of greenhouse gas, like almost at all these key moments that you've put there,
absolutely.
And it's contributing to global warming.
Absolutely, but the big bits are where it comes from and where it ends up.
Okay, so it's beginning and end of its life, and. So let me start by digging into this 9%, right? Because I think a big thing, when we were all growing up, right, was this idea of recycle your plastics. And then it was, actually, can you even recycle these things?
Yeah.
And so take to us from your, you're someone who's been researching this, studying this, looking at all the data. Tell us a little bit about that 9%. Like, I want to understand what is happening there. Like, am I wrong to think that actually most plastic, am I wrong to be trying to recycle like this?
No, we've got to recycle, but there's a very famous scientific paper that was released a few years back that said 9% of plastic ever produced has been recycled. Now, that's because there's so many different reasons why we're not recycling more. Some plastics are not designed for recycling. Then through that, sometimes there's leakage along the way. So plastic falls out of the system through mismanagement. It's not being collected. Then when it is collected, sometimes it's contaminated. So you need good quality plastic. So if it's covered in food, for example, it's very hard to recycle that.
Right.
If it's
so that's why you have to clean the stuff out. Yeah.
Exactly. So sometimes the flexibles that you get, on top of the when you microwave stuff, you feel like that sometimes is covered in food and flexible, very hard to recycle. Also things which you call these complex, different types of plastic again, very hard. So the stuff you just can't recycle or it's contaminated. And then when it gets to the recycling facilities, there needs to be better technology, more investment into that tech. And then I guess a lot of the time, there's not the certainty that plastic can then be sold for a good price. So it's hard to make that investment to get the best quality technology, right? So a lot of the time we end up with, when we do recycle things, it ends up being downcycled into plastic bags or bin bags, for example, instead of back up to good high quality plastics. So we've got problems all the way along the system.
Okay.
Basically.
I'm sorry, statistics are not my percentages of things is not my strong point. But you said 9% of plastics have ever been recycled.
Yep.
And out of what percentage of plastics, because you said something about complex plastics that are like a mixture of different types of plastic. I'm saying plastic so many times. But what percentage of plastics can be recycled? In an ideal world, what percentage do you know?
Well, if we design them for recycling, then arguably 100%.
Wow.
And what does that mean, design them for recycling? What characteristics does that have?
There's certain plastic types which, when you bond them all together, just you're never going to get them recycled effectively by mechanical or chemical recycling. But I think it's about creating standardized plastics without as additives that have got clear markings about what is in them. And then also not attaching loads of complex sort of sticky sort of substances to them or colorings and things like that. And in fact, I think the Consumer Goods Forum, one of the world's biggest consumer organizations, recently released their golden rules they've got sort of 9 golden rules, I think it is, that describe exactly what it is you should do to make plastics recyclable. So there is sort of increasing standardization around what is the right composition of plastics. How do you make them recyclable? And, I think that people are kind of getting on board with that.
So first I want to talk a little bit about circularity. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how that plays into being part of the solution.
Sure, definitely. So last year we spent a long time with, representatives of about 90% of the plastic produced in Europe to work on what a level of circularity can be achieved through all the different levers we have at our disposal today. So I'll just list them out. So firstly, elimination of unnecessary plastic. If you get, for example, something which has got double packaging in it, or for example, unnecessary headspace in your bag of tortilla chips or something like that, a lot of those uses of plastic just aren't needed. You can eliminate them without losing any of the usefulness of the plastic.
I actually just saw this, just to interrupt, recently on a Barilla pasta box, where they actually said on the box, you might see something missing. We've removed our plastic window on the box. And I thought,
well done, Barilla.
Well done, but also well done for telling me, because now I'm more conscious to know about it.
And people are starting to kind of buy that as a preference, because they go, you know what, I can buy that thing that doesn't have plastic versus a thing that does have plastic. Right. When it's not necessary, people increasingly want the thing that doesn't have the unnecessary.
Yeah.
So eliminate the unnecessary plastic first. Then there's reuse schemes. So, everyone has reusable coffee cups, right? And then there's also these take-back schemes like bottles that you can return, plastic bottles and so on. That's just the start of it. This is actually a really, really big part of things that supermarkets can start doing, retailers can start doing, where they adopt these systems where they actually will deliver whatever it is and then take back whatever packaging, for example. So that's something we always used to do, right? We used to have, for example, the milkman idea. You take your milk,
they collect the bottles.
Take the bottle back.
Yeah.
It's exactly that principle.
I remember so vividly being little and going with my mum into the body shop and filling up the shampoo and
Yeah.
then putting in the scent
Yeah.
that you wanted. And then that kind of, all of that disappeared. And then it became like a really high-end hippie thing of like,
Yep.
fill your own.
Yeah, you can
like
only
it kind
do
of
it in, like, Whole Foods.
And
Yeah.
now it feels like maybe
It's coming back. And the Body Shop now do that again. You know, I
Yay.
have
So good.
my Body Shop shampoo reuse things.
Yes.
So I think it's going to be a really, really big part of the solution. Then you have substitution. So looking at those really complicated plastics I talked about, actually substituting them for alternatives like paper and coated paper and things like that. So you can do that for a bit, not too much, but there's some movement there. So then you have recycling, and everyone knows sort of the traditional recycling is the mechanical recycling, which is sort of chopping up the plastic and then just making it back into normal bottles. And then there's a new kind of recycling coming through at the moment called chemical recycling, which is where you break the plastic down from the bottle or whatever it is today, melt it back into the original substance that you use to make the polymer, the plastic itself, and then you kind of do a bigger loop back and then make it, and it's almost basically as good as new. There's some challenges to that. It's not very big right now, but it's looking like it's going to scale very significantly in the coming years.
Okay, super. So this is helpful because I think part of it is, we're starting to see these processes and these thinkings coming down, filtering down to a consumer level, which seems like great progress. But the thing that listening to you made me think about is I definitely think that there's been this push recently about how plastic is like the big bad, like plastic bags are evil and straws and all this kind of stuff. But the thing you made me think about is there's some things where we need plastic, right?
Yeah, I mean, our society is powered by plastic. We couldn't live without plastic today. I don't think we could sustain the global economy as big as it is. We couldn't all survive if we just got rid of plastic tomorrow, right? We built our economy around the uses of plastic. Plastic provides insulation. Plastic provides, very good resource efficiency. Right?
Yeah.
It makes cars lighter, so therefore we're not burning as much fuel in the cars.
This is. I just want to stop here. This is a really interesting point because it's using like the idea of making cars lighter or insulation. These are both things that are used as solutions to climate change, right? But they require something that contributes to climate change, and this is something I'm like trying to wrap my head around.
So that's the big thing. Plastic provides amazing benefits to society, but it's got some downsides too, right? So it's got the pollution element and it's got the greenhouse gas problem. Right? These are two big problems in the plastic system. So what we need to do is solve those, and then just that way we can enjoy the benefits without having the downsides.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really focused on cracking right now. Circularity being one of the big ways of getting better control over the system, knowing where the plastic is, making sure we use it more efficiently in the right applications. And then on the greenhouse gas side of things, circularity solves a huge amount of those greenhouse gases. About 2/3 of them can be removed purely through just doing more circularity. And then the residual bit, there's new technologies coming through that can address that last chunk.
Yeah. And I think it made me think about, because the example you used earlier was this idea of medical plastic for medical purposes, which I think really, for me, just goes to the heart of it. Because that is somewhere where we all understand why we have to use single-use plastics, right?
Yep.
It's not a question. And so I think it made me question this black or white view of something, because actually
just get rid of it.
That kind of attitude of like, well, we just need to stop.
Yeah, there is, and there's some hygiene products and there's some food contact applications. Now, there are other ways, there are more circular ways to try and address those things. But particularly in the medical example, you need to have that hygiene, right? It's really critical. So in that particular instance, you could try and go down, for example, the chemical recycling route that I talked about. But ultimately, we did this very extensive study last year saying practically how much circularity can you drive in the system by 2050. And we got to a number just around 80% circularity. So you still have that residual 20% of the system that is linear. You have to put stuff in, you have to take stuff out.
Yeah.
So then what do you do with that?
And with that 80%, like ideal, best case scenario, 80% of circularity, what happens to, might be a stupid question, but what happens to like all of the landfill plastic? So you said that there's loads of plastic that we've just put in landfills or we bury or we burn. And that's done now? There's no way of saving that? Or is there
Well, I mean, the stuff that's burnt has gone into the atmosphere.
Yeah, obviously.
So that's already there.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I know that at some point we can actually potentially draw it out the atmosphere,
Okay.
right? So that's one of the future possibilities that we can
All right.
direct air capture,
Yeah.
they call it, and then you can make plastics out of that again. But I guess
Wait, so you can pull the plastic that we've burnt in the past, and that's turned into carbon and is in the air, or methane
in the atmosphere.
in the atmosphere. So it's in the air.
Yep.
You can, you personally,
I'm going to go
grab
there
it with your hands,
with some tweezers. I'm going to pick it out.
take it out of the
Yeah.
air, and then turn that back into more, hopefully not single-use plastic.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. So we make, like, you want to do as much circularity as you possibly can.
Right.
Right. But there's still a bit of a linear system left. So therefore, what do? We're making all this plastic out of fossil, out of oil.
Yeah, right.
And there's a lot of problems with that. In the future, what we're going to need to do is shift to different sources for our carbon. We can't get it out of the oil. We're going to need to look at things like biomass. Anything that's grown, even if it's waste biomass.
Is that what biomass is? Things that are organic?
Yeah, anything that's grown through photosynthesis,
Okay.
right? So,
Okay.
and that could be woody biomass, it could be like literally sustainably grown forest trees. It can also just be waste that we put in our food waste, for example.
Okay.
It could be oils, bio-oils from cooking and things like that. And you can take all that stuff as basically it's grown. So what it does is sucks carbon out of the atmosphere to grow.
Yeah.
So all the carbon's trapped now inside that biomass instead of in the atmosphere. We can take that and we can turn that into plastics.
Oh, wow.
And then what you can do is after those plastics have been used, ideally many times through circularity, when they need to be taken out of the system because they've been contaminated or something else like that, you can burn them at end of life, capture the carbon, and then potentially sequester that down in the ground.
Wow.
You can put that back down into, similar places to where the oil came from in the first place.
So this is sorry, I've just had a real shift in the conversation. This is a resolvable issue. This is like-
that's what I hear is this idea that we have solutions for some of it, which we need to double down on, do faster. And then the parts where we have the theory and we have some of the application, but it's not moving fast enough, we've got a bit of time then, if we do the other stuff, to get there.
Yeah. By doing these two things, getting our carbon from a different place and putting it back into the ground when it's finished with, that means we can actually start turning the whole plastic system into a carbon sink. We can actually use it as a means of carbon removals. And I mean, that's really powerful because I guess on one hand, we end up with a plastic system which today is just very linear, very fossil-based, very high emissions intensity.
Yes.
And we can move the whole thing across to a system which is either circular or is carbon negative and sequesters carbon, right? So, and the best thing about that is it de-risks the whole transition because then if circularity gets really big, great, right? We've done great work. If it doesn't get quite so big as we hope, then that just means we have a little bit more of this carbon negativity. So either way, you hedge your whole transition and you end up with a sort of safer pathway to net zero.
Okay.
Or beyond net zero.
So you're not talking about, because like you said before, Marion, the big message that I've had for, I guess, the whole of my life around plastic has been stop using plastics, like try and minimize the amount of plastic you're using, which I guess in some regards is good, yeah? But the point here is not that plastic is inherently evil. The point is that we have to find a new system, or we have to implement new systems or creating plastic that are less harmful. And you said
Exactly.
that if we use those methods, it can become a carbon sink. So then we are getting rid of more carbon than we're producing.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, at the end of the
Wow.
day, climate change is caused by having too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we can potentially go and use a couple of technologies to make sure we take that out of the atmosphere, use it for the benefit of society, and then at the end of life, put it back in the ground. So in doing so, we can protect the climate too. So that would be the ideal situation.
Okay, I have two questions. I have two questions here that I have to ask. I think I'll start with the easy one. In terms of that, the capture, the reuse, so that it becomes a sink, where is the technology on that? Is it ready to go, or is it? Tell us where we are on the scale of being able to do that.
Great question. Look, so a lot of the technologies, particularly on the, let's say, the capture technologies and then putting it in the ground technologies that I've described are early stage, right? So they need more development. They need scaling out to massive commercial scale globally. There are examples of this, right? So I'm not talking about technologies which are in a lab somewhere. There's technologies which are actually in practice. They have reached a degree of commercial scale. They need to be improved, right? So, for example, there's this thing called direct air capture, which is just a machine that sucks carbon directly out of the air. It's really expensive today. It takes a lot of renewable energy to do it, but it will progress over time. So it'll be optimized, it'll get cheaper, it'll get more energy efficient. At some point, it will mean that you can get a ton of carbon out of the atmosphere for something relatively more affordable, hopefully. I mean, it might be towards 2040, might be towards 2045, that kind of thing. But that's why we need to continued innovation so that we can get these technologies along the path, more efficient, more cost effective, and then we can start using them.
So this is about, in a way, if we're thinking about net zero, if we're thinking about getting to zero greenhouse gas emissions, the idea is that all of the other things take us a certain part of the way, and then in that last bit of time that we hopefully we've then bought ourselves in between up to 2050 to get to zero, we're able to. It gives us this like lead time to do the R&D, to do the market stuff,
That's exactly
to get
right.
there, and then suck that last bit down.
Exactly. So that's the thing. So the circularity levers that we've got, for example, eliminating unnecessary plastic, you're already talking about things that are happening, right? So a lot of these circularity things are at our disposal today, and we should do them as soon as we possibly can. Some of them are less technically complex. Some of them are like smaller price tags on them.
Yeah.
So as a result, we can do them without having to raise billions. Whereas some of the, let's say, the big greenhouse gas technologies require big infrastructure and big price tags to them. So exactly that. Like circularity is at our disposal today. We should do as much of it as we can early on. And I guess one of the big things about circularity, particularly, let's say, I was talking about the reuse models, like the coffee cups. If you do just 1 ton of that, that has a ripple effect all the way down the system. You don't need as much infrastructure to collect the plastic. You don't need as much recycling infrastructure. You don't need to landfill it, all that stuff. So just doing that upstream piece is incredibly efficient when it comes to the impact on the whole system.
Okay, I have one more question, which is a tougher question because this isn't something you can really control, but I'm curious to know your opinion on this. So, and this is like a bit more of like a deep dive question.
Yeah, I was just going to say before, I hate doing these types of episodes because I always feel so dumb.
No, you
I'm always
don't.
like, so it's made of carbon. Oh my goodness. But go for it. I'm with you.
This is somewhere where I struggle a bit when we're thinking about carbon capture, or CD, any kind of carbon dioxide removal. Is, I think that we're on the same page of like where it fits in the solution, right? The reason I get stressed about it, stress is not the right word, the reason I'm apprehensive about it is because I feel like I also hear it being used as an excuse to continue extracting fossil fuels. Like, oh, we can keep doing this because we'll just build massive CDR, like carbon dioxide removal stuff.
Right.
And I'm as someone who's an expert in this, I'm just curious as to how do you feel about that? What is your perspective on it? Yeah, just because that's the thing that always goes in my mind is like, we need to do these things, but I see it already being used as a way for the extractive industries to continue extracting, which have problems beyond just the end users, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the net in net zero, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. So what's the quality of net zero we're talking about here? Is it net zero where we do these massive offsets? So by having negative emissions and removals, that gives us a license to do loads of positive emissions. Exactly. What you really want is the smallest absolute amount of emissions you possibly can and the smallest amount of offsets necessary. So it's the quality of net zero you're trying to achieve. I think that...
By the way, I have to say, I love phrasing it like that. Like in net zero, it is just it's an equation, right? Mm-hmm. So, but the quality, I love the way of talking about the quality of net zero because, you could just try to do everything you're doing now and then just suck it all down and use that as an excuse. But that's not what we're aiming for.
And I think that's like, I think that we need to, I mean, I don't want to be too much of a downer, but we need to be really aware of the urgency of this situation, right? So the International Panel on Climate Change just came out with a report earlier this year, which said if you do the maths, we've got about 6.5 years before we pass 1.5 degrees. So therefore, just looking at that.
And 1.5 degrees, just to say, it has massive consequences, right? Like, you're looking at 80% loss of coral reefs, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people dying because of sea level rise. Like, this is not, 1.5 degrees is not even an like, it's not
great.
It's not what if we were going back 100 years, we would not aim for 1.5.
No, absolutely not. So this sort of this sliding scale, right, between 1.5 and 2 degrees. 2 degrees is a really not good place to be.
Yeah.
1.5 is okay, but we don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be there for long if we can get back to
Yeah.
sort of 1. So it's kind of the next 6-7 years is just incredibly important for the business leaders and for the policymakers to step up and lead and make those difficult decisions that say we're going to go down this route that is for low emissions production and make sure that we tee ourselves up for an orderly transition.
Yeah. Well, we had Zipporah Berman on very early in the season, and it made me really think about the idea of supply versus demand. Like, we've always talked about like demand reduction, but what we're talking about here is also supply reduction. Like, we need these people to lead and to make those difficult decisions and to do it with people in mind. So that's my perspective on it, is like, yes, we need to stop extraction as quickly as possible because we have everything. We've already dug up everything we can use and still stay within 1.5 degrees. But then we also need to make sure we do it in a way that like protects the most vulnerable people in that system, so workers, etc. And that is down to leadership. Like, I can definitely have my reusable coffee cup, and I can even vote for people who have good environmental policies. But at the end of the day, I cannot design the policy or the transition system as me right now. And so that does come down to showing leadership, right?
Yeah, it is. And we've been aware of this problem for a very long time. I remember doing my GCSEs and learning about climate change,
true
right?
story. Yeah.
And here I am, in my 30s. I won't say exactly where, but now it's real, right? It's getting really real, and we've sat on this problem for a long time. Yeah. But you just look at the numbers that have come out now, and you realise this is the decade to act, and we can't talk about it anymore. I've written a report earlier this year, Reshaping Plastics, all about circularity in the plastic system in Europe. I'm doing another one all about all the technologies on the other side and the capture and all that stuff in the plastic system that's coming out in September. I feel like I've done enough report writing now. I feel like I've covered the subject. And now what I'm really focused on is thinking about how do we unlock the capital that goes into those specific technologies so that in, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years, I could hold in my hand a lump of plastic that I know is carbon negative, right? Now that's exciting. Because if you could do that, I mean, let's say you could go and sell that to, any company on the planet that uses that piece of plastic then can actually start making their products negative emissions. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have Instagram?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't need to tell us what your Instagram is, but you should change your Instagram handle to The Plastic Man. Just a suggestion. And I'm going to ask you a question as The Plastic Man. But I think for me, as like average person, city dweller, normal consumer, Ben, I can sometimes feel like, well, this problem is nothing to do with me then. Like, it feels like it's above me. What can the average Joe do, or the average Ben do, to help mitigate or abate? I've heard you use that word a lot today, and I like the word abate. To abate the issue with plastic. What can I do to?
The number one thing is engage with all the circularity stuff. So part of it is not using plastic unnecessarily, right? Then you'll see these reuse schemes emerging in the supermarkets and in shops. At the end of the day, those are startups. They're trying to get cash in the door. They're trying to prove their model works, right? And the big thing you can do is buy that stuff, right? Because every time you spend money, you vote for the future you want. If you spend money, instead of going down the legacy route, which is linear, fossil, high emissions, instead you spend on that reuse model, then you can basically give that startup cash for a start and help them scale. But also, the supermarkets are tracking how people are spending their money. They see those models being adopted, and then they go, this is a big thing. We need to adopt this in our massive supermarkets all over the country. And then that's become the norm. You look at France, for example, they've insisted that they start doing these reuse models in like 30% of their shelving and stuff like that. They've got the most progressive policy regime on the planet. They are already doing that shift. So, as a consumer, what you need to do is you need to be the demand signal to all the big decision makers in the corporations and say, these models work, we want to engage with them, this is the future we want, and then that will scale up, the adoption will happen.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think it's like very empowering. It's like a way of voting. I loved what you said.
Yeah,
because we think about voting with our vote, like our electoral vote, but also every time we spend money in this system, it is creating a signal, and that is really, really powerful. And I think it's a great place for us to maybe transition to the final question we have for you, which is a special segment that we do.
And now it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
On the spot.
Hey, there's loads of guilt that comes with living in the modern world.
Yeah.
Because we live in an economy and a society that's not designed to be low emissions, for example.
That's what everyone says.
Right?
No, joking.
But it is
true.
It is right. But should each person feel that guilt every single day?
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's really hard because we're not yet set up to live a low emissions lifestyle. Yeah. So actually, you can't maybe just reduce that sense of guilt a little bit, right? So what I try and do is I try and go vegetarian. I try and go increasingly vegan, right? But I absolutely love eating meat.
What is your favorite meat?
That's what steak, right?
Steak is your favorite.
Steak is the worst possible meat.
But is steak the worst, or is no, steak is the worst.
Steak is just a whole different ball game of bad, right? So, what do? Right? Well, I eat meat now and again, right? But I just eat less. And I eat chicken, and chicken is just not as bad, and fish as well, right? So I crack now and again and stuff. But so long as I don't wake up the next morning and find I've eaten a 32-pound steak, I'm feeling all right about myself. Okay, and that's the thing. You've got to do your best as far as you can, but also not feel too guilty about everything, because we're trying to bring these models through that make you able to live a low emissions lifestyle, but they're not here yet. So we just got to try and push the boat a little bit.
So what I've taken away from this is you can still be an awesome plastic advocate and enjoy a steak from time to time.
Yeah. I don't know. You can have some fried chicken, I think.
Okay, fried chicken. All right, we'll take it. I prefer that anyway.
Yeah. Get your KFC in a paper box.
Yeah, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please rate, subscribe, and share this episode with a curious friend. It makes us possible to keep making this amazing content for you.
Oh, and slide into our DMs at TEDx London and let us know which climate extraordinaires you'd love to hear from next time. But wait, that is not all.
No, this podcast was produced by the amazing Josie Coulter.
Curation and research by the genius Tara Cooper.
Artwork designed by the visionaries that are Sabrina Russo and Rebecca Mingus.
Mixed and engineered by the iconic Ben Beheshti, aka The Falcon, who also composed our banging theme tune.
Presented by me, Mariam Pasha.
And by me, Ben Hurst. Stay curious.